today's didactic will be on the topic integration of Western cultural approaches to generational and historical trauma in Native youth. And now we'd like to begin our didactic presentations. I would like to introduce our first didactic presenter, Maegan Wrights at the door, who's Dakota Nakota and Absenti Shawnee. She has served as the executive director of the University of Montana National Native Children's Trauma Center in Missoula, Montana since 2015, working to support the NNCTC's mission, which is to co-facilitate trauma-focused healing in tribal communities. Maegan utilizes her knowledge in culturally trauma responsive care to provide training and technical assistance with a wide variety of systems of care, including but not limited to schools, child welfare, juvenile justice, and healthcare. She provides administrative oversight for all center activities, including personnel management, relationship building with partner leads, and communication with federal sponsors. Dr. Wrights at the Door also conducts outpatient counseling services on a limited basis. She carries a Blackfeet name by marriage, but is an enrolled member of the Fort Peck Sioux and Anishinaabe tribes and descendant of the absentee Shawnee tribe of Oklahoma. We'd like to welcome Dr. Wrights at the Door. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, it's an honor to be here. And today we're going to be talking about enhancing our historical trauma lens out of the weeds and healing the root. And, doing this work, we recognize that really addressing trauma is helping us achieve progress on really healing, the foundational root of a lot of different difficulties and issues that happen individually, familially, and community-wide. And so it's a topic that, we feel is really important to not only just increase our knowledge about, but truly, really implement this way of being in the world, and really help us return to our cultural roots and values as people. Jeremiah already did introduction, so I don't feel like I need to go into too much more about who I am, but I am joining you from Missoula, Montana. And we did have a storm. I am joining you via wireless. I apologize if anything cuts in and out during our time together, but thanks for joining. So I have a couple of learning objectives for this short time period. And the first is to increase a broader understanding of how to mitigate the impact of trauma using Western and Indigenous approaches, and think about it from a community-wide level. And enhancing clinical interviewing about historical trauma with Indigenous clients. So first, one of the greatest things I think from doing this work and providing training on adverse childhood experiences all of the time has really led me to is to want to talk about the healing side of the adverse childhood experiences, studies, results, and the where we go from now. How do we help people shift into a framework of healing instead of focusing on deficits, thinking about how we achieve healing in a community-wide way, and really see this from a comprehensive picture and think about what that means on this level. And of course, acknowledge the work that's already happening in this area, but most importantly, to give us hope that, the adverse childhood experiences studies results is a little doom and gloom, and we prefer to continue to maintain hope and point out all the ways that our communities have healed over time. And so if we just take a look at the other side of the pyramid, we can see that, the original ACEs pyramid was expanded upon to include historical and intergenerational trauma, leading to social conditions that then make make the way toward increasing people's risk for adverse childhood experiences. This is why this pyramid does start with addressing these historical and intergenerational trauma by uplifting tribal sovereignty and providing decision-making power for communities to decide how healing happens as much as possible. And really, cultural revitalization has already begun, but continuing that in a really purposeful way and paving the way for traditional healing to be uplifted and really be revitalized as well in our communities. And, we think about thriving and safe communities, and that means quite a lot. That means not just economically, but also thinking about justice and really thinking a lot of ways in which we go about providing safe communities in a holistic way, thinking about all different kinds of safety and how all of this really foundation really paves the way for more positive childhood experiences to occur on all the levels, child, family, and community wide. And there's a lot of things that we see that we are already doing in providing healing, providing social emotional learning and cultural and identity development. There are already a lot of things that we do to, teach about cultural values and teach about coping skills. So I think one of the things that this helps us see is that we are already on a path of healing and that there are multiple ways of healing, that it's not just one magic treatment or one magic curricula or practice, right? That it is a lot of these in combination that help us achieve this on a much broader level. And all of these things go toward helping us, achieve wellness and balance and be able to not just live longer, but hopefully find meaning in restoring our roles as elders and being here much longer with our relatives on Mother Earth. So this kind of really helps us, substantiate a lot of healing practices. There's multiple avenues of healing, and that not one entity is responsible for all this or cannot be assumed to even be responsible for this, that it really does take a community-wide effort to see a lot of these things come to fruition and really make a targeted effort to start working together to see all of this through. And, foundationally, we talk about increasing people's trauma knowledge and going around the nation, and everyone's trying to help people increase their knowledge of trauma. But one of the foundational things that really helps this put this into our daily living is to really have this lens in which to operate from. And because we're collectivistic, we expand upon the traditional what's wrong with you to what's happened to you question to parents, families, and communities at large, not what's wrong with this parent or family or community, but what's happened to this parent, family, or community largely. And I think one of the foundational areas where we've really tried to, promote is really that by having this lens does help us return to our cultural values and our cultural roots. It's not that we've lost these things. It's just that trauma has interfered with our ability to maintain and adhere to these values all of the time. But that when we do heal, that we are able to return to this, our original ways of being in the world. And, this is really helpful in being able to utilize in our work, not just professionally, but also personally, and really being able to have the power to even tackle things like lateral oppression in our communities. And so there's a lot of application to this that it really does help us be able to have this lens on when interacting with others in the world. So it's pretty powerful when we really think about it. So another thing that we want to uplift is really just understanding, that there are other explanations for why things happen, right? You know, why things occur in life. Because if we expand our thinking around these things, then we also understand, and try to learn from those that we work with. How do they believe healing happens from this? Not only how did it arise, but also how do you feel that you need to heal from this is such a much broader question that can include a lot of things that we may not be thinking about. And so these are just some examples of, some other explanations that people may pose to us, and other types of healing that we may not be offering, or thinking about or exploring with them, or connecting them with others in their community who can do these kinds of things. And of course, it'll definitely need to be, focused on the specific, background of the client you're working with, but certainly helps us think more broadly about these kinds of things, and really validates their experience of why it's occurring, and not just viewing it through this Western diagnosis lens. So I haven't seen, there's probably is a little bit more out there now, but from talking with people who I know have been in counseling, and I just know a lot of Indigenous people have said, my therapist has never asked me about historical trauma in our sessions, and it's not really something that is coming up a lot still. I think it's getting a little bit better now, but I still think that there's not a lot out there. And so I had a couple of colleagues, Dr. John and Rita Summers Flanagan, who was revising their clinical interviewing textbook, and they were asking kind of just what are some things that are really important for this revision. And so I said, it'd be really important to give at least some guidance on how to do some clinical interviewing about historical trauma. And so in this textbook, there's some guidance. On the slide is just examples of some things that, some ways in which you can start asking these various questions throughout the cultural formulation interview in the areas of, eliciting core problems and concerns, causes, role of cultural identity, coping and healing, barriers, preferences, and even thinking about the relationship, really exploring how comfortable they feel even talking with us about this in this context. And how does it feel for me to be, what do you view is my role in helping you during our time together, and really kind of opening that up. So it's just another resource for you. I know that you will be given some resources after today's presentation, and so you'll have access to the link for that. One of the things that is a part of this is a video of myself and my colleague, Dr. Marilyn Brewer Zimmerman, who is my client. Not in the video, she's Joanne in the video, but she plays my client, and we go through a scenario where she's presenting for services, and I use some of these questions for an example. So we don't have time to go into that or show parts of the clip, but that'll be available for you to watch at a later time if you'd like to see something like that. So in the chat, we don't have a lot of time to go over a lot of this, but yeah, I'm be curious to read about, and if you'd share with us and others on the call, if you have, how do you open up these conversations in your practice, or how do you envision incorporating it into the future, and what things might you share with others, as you all are all knowledge holders and wisdom keepers in this area as well. So it was Gordon Paul who first posed the question, what treatment by whom is most effective for this individual with that specific problem and under which set of circumstances? I'm sure you've all been exposed to that question for sure, especially with thinking about evidence-based treatments and empirically supported treatments and practices and all that's unfolded over the years. But, I really, again, I think because we're collectivistic, we really think about this on a much broader level. If we bring this out to community level, the question really becomes what healing practices by whom are most effective for this population with that set of problems, under which set of circumstances, and just allows us to have a much broader picture that encompasses not just Western, but Indigenous approaches, and also what kind of who and what gets to define what we mean by effective, right? And, it's something I've been thinking about a lot is, within, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, there's the practice components of that. And these components are similar among other evidence-based trauma treatments. And I was really trying to uplift Indigenous ways of healing and thinking about what are some, parallels within our community that we uplift that are very similar ideas and purposes behind some of these practices that have been around for generations upon generations, that really speak to some of these things that we already know and do, and really substantiate why we continue to do them, right, over time, right? That they are, some people would say, practice-based evidence, that we continue to do them because they do work, and people find them healing in a lot of different ways. So I just wanted you to see this picture of really uplifting some of these components that are already in existence. And then lastly, wanting to really talk about innovations in honoring tribal healing that are becoming more and more integrated into organizational practices, and even our own health as staff members. So we've seen, people starting to get release of information to be able to collaborate with tribal healers in the community, having the tribal governing entity endorse a list of people who are considered to be, these are the people who we would say are our people, so that everyone knows who they are, so that this information can be more accurately shared and distributed, and so that even new people who are coming into the community have that readily available, and to have something like that. Also hiring or collaborating with tribal healers to provide services in and outside facilities. Of course, these are going to be conversations that communities need to have locally to decide whether tribal healers feel that that's appropriate, or how to make sure that that's done in a sensitive way that honors their culture, but certainly has continued to grow in that opportunity. We've also seen mental health professionals and tribal healers co-facilitating services within the same session. And that's not always done all of the time, but certainly we've heard of that happening, and typically the mental health professional is responsible for writing notes in a way for the session. And because integrated care is happening, we also see that it could be, even health professionals and tribal healers collaborating in the same similar way of mental health professionals collaborating. We see more talks and start to think about reimbursing tribal healers through third-party billing. We're getting closer and closer to realizing that through a few states who are really making progress in this area. And we also see even organizations reimbursing traditional healers through their employee assistance programs so that their staff can access traditional healing and be able to have that as an option. So we're seeing that as well. And then, of course, as has already been done and continues to do, tribal healers are working to develop or adapt existing treatments or curricula, or develop their own interventions from the ground up, from community, and have that be resources for people. So a lot of innovations. I think it's really exciting to hear about all of these things. You may have seen a recent webinar. I wasn't able to attend it. It sounded like there were a lot of people on it about reimbursing through third-party billing, a conversation that just had a listening session around it, and some conversation. So I think it's becoming even more and more of a priority, and it'd be interesting to see where the conversation takes us. So that was just a short period of time for myself. I want to make room and make sure that we allow time for our other honored speakers and our case presentation today. Thank you for having me, and I'll look forward to staying in contact with you if you should want to reach out.
And we'd now like to introduce our next speaker. And we are going to be joined by Dr. Kiana Maillet. And Dr. Maillet is from the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone tribe, where she sits on various committees and was previously an ICWA representative. She is a licensed clinical social worker and owner of Hichito, where she provides virtual mental health services throughout California. Kiana is a registered play therapist, EMDR certified, perinatal mental health certified, a board certified telemental health provider, and has over 25 years of experience working with youth and families and building and running programs to support them. Kiana is also an adjunct professor of child development with the San Diego Community College District and lecturer with CSUSM American Indian Studies. And now we'd like to turn this over to Dr. Maillet. Welcome.
Manahu Tuyaga, Kiana Maillet, Nanianet, New Payunata Wagumana, Muchunu, San Diego, Wanovidu. My name is Kiana Maillet. I come from Payuhunadu, otherwise known as the place where the water flows, otherwise known as the Owens Valley. I'm specifically from the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone tribe, and you already heard the rest about me. Basically, I live out here in Spring Valley, which most people know San Diego, and I will start my presentation now. I do have the chat up, so feel free to join in. I prefer to be interactive versus me just talking. My contact information will be at the end, but it's basically kmaillet@hichito.com. So today I'm going to talk about intergenerational trauma, culture, and Native youth mental health. A lot of this will overlap with what Maegan talked about, and also some things that y'all said in the chats. Let's see. Skip over my intro to myself. Disclaimer, I have nothing really to disclose. This is all my own opinions and nobody else's. Learning objectives, you will learn, hopefully, you'll learn 2 ways in which intergenerational trauma impacts Native youth today, acquire new knowledge and understanding of the importance of integrating culture into care, and learn 2 ways in which culture can be woven into mental health practice. I expect, more than 2 ways. I'll tell you more, but that's the goal, minimum 2. Whenever we talk about this, I always want to say, please take care of yourself, because sometimes these kind of presentations can be activating. If you don't know what that means, activation is kind of like when you start talking about something, all of a sudden the tears well up, right? Or the shoulders tense, or you have something in your body that happens. That's activation, right? And if something gets activating to you, feel free to shut down for a minute. Close the computer, walk away, whatever you have to do. If you want to know what you missed, email me, we'll talk. Okay. Because there's probably reasons things activate us, and that is intergenerational and historical trauma, right? Sometimes it's current modern day trauma. So when I say that, recognizing your body responses, what's going on with you, and take a break if needed. I will not be offended if you walk away. Sometimes we have to. So trauma, if you could ask anyone that talks about trauma will give you a whole bunch of different opinions and thoughts of what trauma is. There's not really a universal set definition that this is what trauma is. There are conversations about big T trauma and little t trauma and this and that, but you know what? Trauma, it's trauma. You know what I mean? So I choose not to go with that language myself, but it is out there that people talk about, like the bigger things being the big T and the smaller things being the little t. But you could think about it, I have grandsons, and like something that happens to him, like I didn't put the goldfish in the right bowl, right? That's going to make him react like that is the worst thing in his world in this moment, right? And so I can't really compare that to me losing my housing. I know that sounds weird, but it's those feelings that come up and the way that you handle it. Make sense? Let's see. And so it can be easily defined as events that cause adverse effect on well-being and anything that overwhelms an individual's capacity to cope, right? Goldfish were not in the right color bowl. Can't cope with that anymore. So toddler has to run to the corner for a minute and regulate. Literally happened today before I came. All right. So historical trauma, we talked about that a little bit already with Maegan. It's multi-generational. It's experienced by a specific culture, racial, or ethnic group, transferred to subsequent generations through biopsychosocial means. There are literally research studies on this that show that the trauma from one generation can transmit across multiple generations, right? And so if you think about it, the things that happen to, we'll talk about like my great-grandmother, right? My great-grandmother that was part of the relocation, one of the relocations here in California. If you don't know, read up on it. They happened everywhere. And that's a nice word, saying relocation. It was worse than that. But those experiences of her and her running away from it and finding her way back to the valley, right? Those sit in my spirit. Those sit in my grandson's little souls, right? And so they have that intergenerational trauma running through their own veins, their own blood memory. And that's important for us to know when we're working with anyone, right? Is to understand those histories. Historic and current trauma in Native communities. A lot of it can be tied to, there's the forced loss of language, culture, land. How many of you have ever went back home to heal or to rest or to just feel better? Or maybe you don't have that rooted home to go back to because of whatever histories that pulled you away from it, and that's in you, that feels a certain way, right? So I know for me, sometimes when life gets overwhelming, I will go home, right? So going back to my valley, you smell the sage when you're coming through this little section, right? The mountains start to hug you when you go through. It's a connection, and that's really important. So when we don't have that sits here, right? So that's that removal from that land, or maybe that complete disconnect. There's the breaking up of the Indian family, and that's a whole other like hours and semesters worth of lectures, right? But basically, all these different things that happen that were meant to intentionally break up our families. Now imagine learning parenting from the boarding schools, right? Where people were hurt as a parenting practice, and now those parenting practices kind of get passed down, right? And what I see right now happening in our generations, our current generations, is people trying to break those cycles, right? And so here's a whole nother thing, is to be that cycle breaker is intense pressure, it's intense pain, it's so hard, right? To be that cycle breaker, but so important, because once you break that, like you're changing that path for every generation that follows you, right? And not just your own, but the people who are watching you, right? I'm auntie to a lot of people, None of them are blood related to me, period. Right? But I'm auntie and they're watching what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of stuff that keeps us going. Um, and those of us that are also, tribal and we are connected to our communities and we are doing this work on the ground. I saw some comments about doing the work. There's not a whole lot of acknowledgement out there for the work that we're doing, right? Because we're not sitting there. We don't have time to be up on Instagram posting pictures and doing all these different things. Like we're boots on the ground, we're hiking the mountains, we're out there doing the work. And sometimes that can feel really heavy on us because we are also healing, if that makes sense. And it's the same thing like in academia, and I won't go off too much on that, but like we're the ones doing the research on our people. We have a heavy special connection to that research. It's not like we can just shut it off. It sits with us. I remember doing my dissertation. It sits with us, right? Um, and then currently being forced to be part of oppressive and harmful systems. So you have this historical trauma, and it's also moving into modern day trauma, right? Current trauma. And this is happening with a lot of our kids, we have a lot of kids in the schools who like they wake up with this high anxiety because they know they're going to get bullied when they go into school. They just know it. But guess what? They have to go or else they get in trouble. Their parents get in trouble. There's all kinds of things that are happening. So on top of all this heavy historical to intergenerational trauma sitting on their shoulders, they're piling up with, here, bring me more trauma. Let's go, right? They're going to the medical systems, being told that, their pain is just anxiety. True story. That was my daughter, right? Until the doctor found out I was a mental health clinician. So these are the things that we experience on the everyday. I already went over being into the DNA. The impact can also be culture and identity confusion, disconnection, and loss. And there's a lot of different struggles with identity within our communities for all the various reasons, all the different histories that have happened, right? Sometimes our people go the negative coping mechanisms, and that's really hard. And we have a lot of people trying to break those cycles. I see it all the time, and I see people also fall back into those ways because that's what they know, right? And that gets really hard. So there's abusive behaviors like guys talking about, they're passing down a parenting practice that come from the boarding schools. Like those things happen when it comes to relationships. Do we have like role models of healthy relationships in our lives, right? That's something to think about in our communities. Who's out there showing us what an actual healthy relationship looks like? I remember sitting with a friend one day, listening to her and her husband communicate in a really healthy way. And they were arguing, but they were healthy in a healthy way. And I was looking at it like, this is so odd to me because I'm not used to that, right? I'm used to a little bit more aggressive, the way, I've always seen it. So that was amazing to see that. And so it's important that we have those examples. Now, my whole dissertation was on racism and microaggressions experienced in early childhood education. And what we found, which we kind of already knew, is that it starts at early childhood. It starts at day one when someone walks into school, right? And so that's additional trauma being added onto our youth, right? And also onto the parents, right? So the parents had these experiences too. So one thing that came out in some of the interviews that I did was that the parents were uncomfortable going to the schools and advocating for their children because it was so triggering to go to the schools, right? So like it didn't feel safe for them to go there and advocate for their children. Some of them did, but some really, really struggled with it. Here's just some statistics to know. More than 2/3 of children report at least one traumatic event by age 16. Native youth are 2.5 times more likely to experience trauma compared to non-native peers. The poverty rate among American Indian Alaska Natives in 2018 was 25.4%, more than 1 in 3 of the children live in poverty, and NICWA reports that Native children are overrepresented in foster care at more than 2.4 times the general population. Now that goes back to, the systems working against us once again, right? I know that we had talked about trauma-informed care at the previous presentation. It's just super important that we understand, to understand the trauma and the potential trauma that our clients have experienced, how it impacts their symptoms and daily living, right? So how does it impact their anxiety if they literally have to get up and go into school where they are going to get bullied and nobody's going to help them, right? These are things to really think about. It's the trauma is not just one and done. For a lot of our youth, it's ongoing, right? It's you doing trauma or practicing trauma-informed care is more than just checking a box that you got a training. Like it has to be very intentional, and it has to be everything that you do, right? We need ongoing learning as the helpers that we are in order to implement this. So how do we weave in culture? I know that's what some people were thinking about for this. First and foremost, I just want to say that our cultures are not all the same. So please, keep that in mind. Not everyone's going to burn sage, right? That's something we see a lot out here because a lot of people do out here. But I remember being at a youth event, and some of our Northern California relatives were like, I don't really know what to do with that, because that wasn't one of their practices, even though we do see it common amongst a lot of people. So we're not the same. Always keep that in mind. Get to know your clients, get to know their cultures. And by the tribes and the families, they are the experts in their cultures, right? Always keep that in mind because we want to honor their knowledge and experience. Without overwhelming them with making them be our teachers, right? We don't want to push them to like have to teach us because we're the clinicians, but also you can invite them, right? So invite them to come in and provide their knowledge. And it's important to connect clients with appropriate cultural programs. So I have seen harmful programs that supposedly were native, were not, right? So be very mindful and make sure you're really like vetting your programs and the people who are working with them that you send them to. Okay, so one way to weave in culture is language. A lot of our tribes have language departments. If you know where your tribe or where your client is from, you can literally just do a little search of their tribe, and a lot of them have websites and have different resources, right? Some of them have language programs. So we have a language program online that we can do. Our language program sent us cards, and on these cards are different little pictures, right? You don't see these. Like, how many of you guys have something like this? These are pine nuts. I know they look like little turds. They're pine nuts. But so one thing I do is play therapy, right? And so we play cards. We'll play speed and we'll do stuff like that in our sessions. And you could use these kinds of cards if they're appropriate for that culture, right? And we could also use this in talking about like, hey, all right, so here's the point, the arrowhead. How did this shape from a obsidian rock, right? How did this come from that? What kind of changes happened? That could really spark that therapeutic conversation about change, right? So think about these different things. The baskets really carry and hold on to things. Our plants are our medicines. These are our relatives and they're our medicines. They nourish us. So things like that. When you're looking at your environment, does your environment represent the clients that you see, right? Do you have items that are relevant to who they are, right? Not saying all my clients are like this, but like, this is the favorite doll that everyone sees when they come in. This was very expensive because I had to get it from homemade people and I want to pay them for the work they do, right? But how amazing. I've actually bought probably like 15 of these and like given them out because people just love them. And there's little tiny ones too. So like things like that. Is there representation in your office, right? And I will tell you that finding male appearing, I guess, dolls with long hair is so difficult. So as soon as I see these, I jump on them I actually look at one of the Facebook market groups, right? But these are all handmade. And so these are so important though, because I have had my youth when they walk in, they'll look at it and they'll be like, wow, they've never seen a doll that looks similar to them or who they are. When it comes to the baby dolls, right? I have this one's in a little moss bag. I don't know if you can see it. Again, representative of different cultures, right? All of these things I'm showing you are different cultures, but I work with a lot of different people, right? So how great is this to be able to have this in your office, right? Versus your typical things that you always have. And then I know we have Comic-Con coming up in San Diego right now, right? It's the little baby board and it's got so it's integrating different things into it, right? I have a few different ones of these. And, oh, and then I think like Megan was talking about, there are things that we've already done that are healing, right? So singing, music, right? This is a clapper stick. So people are suddenly discovering, as we're aware of, that singing is a healing practice, right? So guess who already knew that, right? Our ancestors, our relatives, us. We already know that. We already use that. Um, and you'll see like all the science being written out about it. But singing or even dancing, right? This is a little jingle dancer. Um, these are practices that are cultural and also healing that we know they're healing. We didn't need that evidence-based science, whatever, to come out and tell us this. These are things we knew. But now we have to be able to integrate them into our practice, right? I have had people dance in session. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not what you learn in grad school, right? Never. I don't, never. But I've had that happen. We've sang songs in session. We've even used medicine for those who it was appropriate for, right? It's just everything's dependent on the client. Um, Even weaving, right? Sometimes we'll weave little projects. This takes a lot longer than one session, but these are ways to integrate it. And that might be bringing a culture bearer, culture practitioner into sessions with you or having them help you run groups, right? We've had groups before that have been the clinician and a cultural bearer together running the groups because we're not telling you to like run the sessions if you're not from that culture, like definitely not, but honor the people who can help you, right? And that's this slide. They can even provide training to staff. They can be helpers, ceremony. Please compensate them fairly because they are spending their gas and their time to do these things. And that's it. I know 20 minutes goes by real fast, but I wanted to make sure to show you all some of the cool stuff that I use in session. Just so you know, we also use a lot of like gaming, geek therapy, like talking about anime songs. We even talk about the words, the language in the songs and the meanings, and those things can all be intertwined with be part of the therapeutic practice. And the kids get so proud when you honor them for that. Like they'll be like, oh yeah, I know how to say 2 words in my language. I'm like, cool, let's go. Like, what is it? And they get so excited, and because I get excited about it, that they can share that and they can bring who they are. So I think it's really important just to honor who they are and let them and bring in whatever you can. And here's my contact info if y'all have any questions, comments, concerns. And that's it. Manahobu.
Thank you again, Dr. Maillet. We really appreciate all of the wonderful information that you're sharing with us today. And you're absolutely right. A lot of our grad programs, they don't sort of make space to validate a lot of what our communities already know, right? Or even make space about how we as Indigenous, clinicians are trying to pull this in and find different ways to talk about it and acknowledge its importance. So I'm just really glad that you're bringing that up. So we know that sometimes there's, folks who are still in training here joining our sessions too, and just honestly thinking about different ways of like how we can use supervision or connecting with the folks who are here with us today to talk about, some of what's coming up, especially when it's not really welcomed or talked about in different spaces. So, thank you again for that. We just really appreciate it.